Hello. Welcome, everyone, to our new Health is Wealth Speakers series, where the Good Life, Healthy Living classes host a distinguished speaker every month to talk to our communities about living better longer. Every Wednesday of this month of February 2021, we'll be celebrating Black History Month with weekly speakers who will focus on African American health and well being. My name is Shanette Merrick. I'm the program manager for the Good Life, where exercise and nutrition is medicine. Thank you all and welcome. All right, so we'll love to know where you guys are tuning in from today. So please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from, okay? And we'd also like to say hello to everybody out there joining us from Facebook. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. It is important that I tell you that the Good Life is a growing national program that is being developed by a network of research centers across the country focused on supporting healthy aging. Together, we develop programming to promote healthy lifestyles and healthy relationships. We are dedicated to reversing the growing public health crisis of dementia affecting economically disadvantaged older adults. We believe that the good life can be achieved by everybody. All right, so the Good Life and Health is Wealth series are developed by UC Davis Alzheimer's Disease Center in the East Bay, the California Department of Public Health, the City of Oakland Parks and Recreation, and the National Institute of Health, better known as the NIH. Before we get started, we have a few tips to help you enhance your Zoom experience. So you'll see a small icon at the bottom of your screen that says chat down there. And when you click on that, you will see a sidebar show up to the right. At the bottom of that sidebar, you can actually type in comments or questions if you have any, and we'll have a chat monitor who will be around to respond to any of your questions, okay? And if you click on the icon that is also at the bottom of the screen that says participants, then you can actually see all the other participants who have joined the session today. So today we'll have about 20 minutes of presentation and about 10 minutes afterwards for Q&A. And without further delay, we are excited to have Dr. Piawah join our discussion around gut health. Dr. Piawah is a gastrointestinal oncologist with a particular interest in colorectal cancer. She also treats patients with sarcoma, a group of rare cancers that affect bones and connective tissues. Dr. Piawah has a background in public health research, particularly in healthcare disparities among racial and ethnic minorities with low-income patients with cancer. Her research is focused on understanding the roles that gut microbiome, diet, and lifestyle play in disparities among those with colorectal cancer and on designing therapies that target these factors. And without any further delay, let's welcome Dr. Piawah.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to speak today. Let me just share my screen. All right, so I will be talking today about the gut microbiome and its role in health as well as disease. So I'm particularly interested in this area, and as was mentioned, I'm a gastrointestinal oncologist. I see a lot of patients with colon cancer, and my research focus is on the role that the gut microbiome might play in some of the disparities we see. So I'm sure that over the last year or so, either in conversations with family, with friends, or online, you've come across the term gut microbiome. But what exactly is it? If you were to look at me or yourself, we're made up of our skin, our internal organs, But if you look even closer under the microscope, we have trillions of microorganisms, of bacteria that naturally live in our gut. So, from our esophagus all the way to our anal canal, we have natural, normal bacteria that live on our skin, in our mouths. And these bacteria, as well as their genetic materials and the metabolites that they produce, make up the microbiome. The bacteria in our gut would be would make up the gut microbiome. And what we're learning over recent years is that they're playing really important roles in maintaining our health, and that disturbances in the populations of these microorganisms might underlie some of the diseases we experience. So essentially, what's come of, I would say, research over the last 5 to 7 years is that if you were to look at everyone's gut microbiome, there's about maybe 90% overlap in terms of the types of different bacterial species that humans have in their gut. And then about 10% of the microbiome might vary between people. And the reasons for that variation include your genetics. So, whether you're predisposed to have one type of bacteria more than another. But then, really importantly, that variation occurs because of the things we do to our bodies. So, the foods we eat, the medications we take, how active we are. And that's what I'll get into later in the talk. But this research has really begun to show that there exists in our gut microbiome a population of, quote, good bacteria. So these are the microorganisms that are in our gut doing what they should be doing, which I'll get into, protecting us from invasion by other not good bacteria. And in some people, there are bad bacteria. So a healthy microbiome has mainly the good bacteria. An unhealthy one would have higher populations of bacteria such as Campylobacter and Enterococcus, which can cause things like diarrhea, upset stomach. So the microbiome plays a lot of important roles in our body. So the bugs, the microorganisms or the bacteria that we have in our gut are actually helping us break down the foods that we eat into important nutrients, into important energy sources. Without them, we really wouldn't be able to efficiently metabolize a lot of the foods we eat. The gas that we all have in our intestines is formed by the bacteria making up our microbiome. And then these last two functions are really important. So if you can imagine, our colon really is made up of normal colon cells that are all really tightly connected. And one of the ways that our microbiome helps prevent us from getting other illnesses if we're exposed to novel bacteria in our environment or in the foods we eat is by really protecting those intestinal cells and maintaining the barrier that we have in our gut. And the microbiome also helps us develop and maintain our immune system. And a lot of what we know about its role in the immune system actually comes from research that was done on mice that were actually bred to not have a single bacteria in them. So they're called germ free mice. And if you look at these mice, they end up developing with really abnormal guts. Their intestines are shorter than normal, and their immune system doesn't function as robustly as the immune system of mice that have an intact microbiome. And we think that essentially what the microbiome is doing is it's helping present certain proteins and signals to our immune cells that help our immune cells in the future identify foreign pathogens and effectively prevent infections. So where do these bacteria come from? Um, Essentially, we think that we get our microbiome at birth. So, some people actually, some researchers think that we might even be exposed to some of our mother's microbiome in the uterus. But certainly at birth, we're exposed to the bacteria that our mothers have in their vaginal canal or in the genital area. If you're born via C-section, you're also exposed to some of the microbiome or the bacteria that's existing in your mother's environment or the environment that you're born in. If you are breastfed, then you're also populating your gut with whatever your mother also might have in her breast milk or on her skin. And then as we age, so as we grow up, we're exposed to whatever bacteria our family members have. So if you were to collect samples from people who've lived together for decades, you might actually see a lot of overlap in terms of their microbiome that's not necessarily explained by genetics, but just by the fact that they're sharing food, they're sharing utensils, and they're exposed to the same bacteria. And then as we age even more, the things that we do to our body can really change our microbiome. So things like taking antibiotics can impact the types of bacteria we have in our gut. Other medications like chemotherapy, we're studying that and its role in the microbiome. Stress, exercise can also impact the balance of bacteria in our gut. And then our genetics, as I mentioned. So, very briefly, the way that we get all of this information about our gut microbiome is essentially two ways. One is either we analyze stool from patients directly, or we collect samples from their colon during colonoscopies. And we extract out the genetic material from either the stool sample or the colon sample. And we run it through a machine that basically tells us all of the different types of bacteria that exist in that sample and what the relative amount of each bacteria might be. And this is kind of what we end up generating or looking at in terms of data. And each column represents a different sample. Each color represents a different type of bacteria. In general, a healthy microbiome is one that has a lot of different varieties of bacteria. An unhealthy one is one that really has a lot of one type and not a lot of other types. So this, for example, would be maybe an unhealthy microbiome because there's a lot of the yellow, which is staphylococcus, and not that much of any other types. Whereas this, for example, would reflect maybe a more healthy microbiome with lots of different colors representing different bacteria. And again, what we think changes over time due to the things that we do to our bodies is not just the types of bacteria that exist, but the relative amount. So the height of each of these colors can change due to our diets. And it's this balance between this type of bacteria versus another that steers us either towards healthful states or towards certain diseases. I put this in because Hippocrates, I saw the quote as I was putting together this talk, and Hippocrates said this many, many years ago. And I think now, as we're learning more about the gut microbiome, this statement really does ring true. And again, really, if you think about it, we have a gut microbiome that's interacting with us, that's interacting with our genome, and is in this balance. And through under the influence of things like our diet, natural aging, medications, improper foods, that microbiome can be tipped one way or another and promote either health or disease. I put race here because it's an area of interest of mine in understanding whether certain racial ethnic groups have different gut microbiome compositions that might explain some of the disparities we see in cancer risk and cancer outcomes. This is not an exhaustive list at all, but these are some of the areas that are under study in terms of the role of the gut microbiome and disease. So there's data coming out on its role in depression, anxiety, autoimmune diseases, including autoimmune arthritis, and then cancer as well. And I also put this slide in because whenever there's talk of the gut microbiome, I think there are naturally questions about this leaky gut syndrome. And I put it in quotations because technically the concept of leaky gut or leaky gut syndrome isn't a medically recognized thing. But the term leaky gut refers to the fact that naturally, while our intestines are made up of normal cells that are all interconnected and protecting us from different pathogens, there's a little bit of flexibility and natural leakiness, meaning some of the contents of your gut sometimes can leak into your bloodstream. And that's actually how we're maintaining our immune system. And proponents of this leaky gut syndrome believe that in some people, due to either genetics or certain foods they're eating or chronic inflammation, there's even more leakiness and more contents of the gut are leaking into our bodies and causing downstream diseases. I think ultimately there's not enough data to say that leakiness is explaining kind of the downstream diseases. And I do think that in time, as we learn more about the microbiome, what we can show is that it's not the leakiness of the gut that's causing the problems, but really it's the changes in the gut bacteria that's explaining some of the diseases we see. The gut brain axis and now the gut brain microbiome axis is another really fascinating um, concept as we explore the microbiome more. So, the gut brain axis refers to the connection that we have between our brain and our stomach, our intestines. So, just as we have nerves in our fingers, toes, everywhere, we have nerves, nerve endings in our gut. The reason why, when you're hungry, your stomach is able to tell your brain that you're hungry is because of this connection. And the reason why, when you're anxious, you feel butterflies in your stomach or cramping is again because of this connection. And what researchers are learning, have learned recently, is that this connection can actually be influenced by the types of bacteria you have in your gut microbiome. So, certain bacteria, like bifidobacterium, for example, tend to lower the levels of stress hormones. It might help you perceive stress differently from someone who has less bifidobacterium in their gut microbiome. I also want to highlight that this connection it's a feedback loop. So the microbiome might influence how you're perceiving certain hormones or the levels of hormones that your body is releasing or experiencing, but then your brain, your mood, the things you're doing related to your mood. So if you're depressed and eating a lot and gaining weight, can actually change your microbiome, and then that change can create this kind of vicious feedback loop. There is some data on the microbiome and depression and anxiety. There are small studies kind of showing that some patients who are on probiotics that are enriched with bifidobacteria or lactobacilli, which are considered the good bacteria, experience less anxiety. There are other studies, again, small, which show that patients who have a diagnosis of major depressive disorder have a different kind of microbiome composition from patients who don't have that diagnosis. And then there's also data showing that alpha diversity, which means how much variety there is in terms of the types of bacteria in your gut, is associated with anxiety. So less variety is associated with kind of a disruption of kind of the signaling that leads to anxiety. And this is important. I think this is all kind of, it's all new, but there's a thought that chronic stress can lead to perhaps chronically elevated levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. and that cortisol itself can actually impact your gut microbiome and cause dysbiosis, which means an imbalance in your gut microbiome. And this imbalance can actually then feed back to the brain and cause other kind of either mood disorders or other physical disorders. So I think, there's not a lot of data yet, but this is an active area of interest, the role of stress on our brain and subsequently our gut and then back to our brain. There's also data on the impact of or the associations between the gut microbiome and dementia. So what I'll say about all of these studies is they are studies that show primarily association, meaning they've looked at people with or without a disease and have shown that patients with a certain disease have XYZ feature in their microbiome. What we're missing in a lot of the research we're doing now is the causation. So, showing that this bacteria actually leads to the development of the disease, because what we might actually be describing is that the disease itself is the reason why your microbiome might be altered. Nonetheless, essentially, patients who score more highly on dementia screens in one study were shown to have higher levels of um, metabolites, so ammonia and then certain short chain fatty acids, whereas patients who scored low on the dementia screen had higher amounts of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. And similarly, in Alzheimer's disease, there's research looking into whether the gut microbiome influences or the amount of amyloid plaque that's deposited in the brain, which we think is the reason why patients develop Alzheimer's disease. And then quickly, again, in type 2 diabetes, there's a lot of interesting research happening. Again, I think you've seen bifidobacterium on many of my slides, but this good bacteria seems to be found in patients who have better glucose metabolism and don't have type 2 diabetes, whereas it's low in patients who have type 2 diabetes. And then in kind of the realm of diabetes and also cancer, we're showing that your microbiome can actually affect the way that your body metabolizes the treatments we're giving you, the oral drugs we're giving you, and that certain bacteria break down the treatments faster, meaning your body doesn't see as much of the drug as you think you're taking in, while others break it down slower. And then this is my area of interest. And this is in terms of colorectal cancer, we actually do have some data that potentially shows causation. So there's one bacteria called Fusobacterium that's been shown in mouse models to actually promote the development of colorectal tumors. And that's essentially via inflammation of normal colon tissue, accumulation of damage in their DNA, and then the cells start behaving abnormally. We've also been able to show that mice that had colon tumors that had a lot of this fusobacterium and then got antibiotics actually had their tumor shrink. So, in terms of cancer and the microbiome, I would say that colorectal cancer probably has the most data really showing that the microbiome likely underlies the reason why people might develop colorectal cancer. And I put this in really just to show my interest, which is in understanding why African Americans are more likely to be diagnosed and die from colorectal cancer, despite kind of better screening, better treatments. And this disparity exists even when you control for things like access and other structural limitations. And my hypothesis is that maybe it's something in our gut, in our microbiome, in the foods that we're eating. I'll skip over this because I think it was mentioned in my introduction. So the last part is about what you can do. So essentially, We think that the gut is influenced by things like stress, things like physical activity. So, overweight also changes the gut microbiome and diet. In terms of cancer prevention, we know that exercising at least 150 minutes a week is associated with a decreased risk of cancer, of colon cancer, but we extrapolate. Avoiding weight gain in adult life, not smoking, and limiting alcohol. In terms of diet, and I put colon in parentheses because a lot of what we know about diet and cancer prevention actually comes from colon cancer research. Um, but we extrapolate it to really any cancer. So, foods that are, so processed meat, meals that are high in red meat, Western pattern diets, so fatty, fried foods, have been shown time and time again to increase the risk of getting colorectal cancer, while diets that are enriched with fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dark fish, tree nuts, so kind of a Mediterranean pattern diet, have been shown to decrease the risks of colon cancer. And that's even in patients who've been diagnosed and had all their treatments. Their outcomes are better if they adhere to this type of diet. Vitamin D also seems to be protective. And the link between diet and cancer, we think, is really via the microbiome. So, this is a compilation of studies that have looked at patients' stool microbiome and the diseases that they had. And what we know is that a plant protein based diet tends to increase that the good bacteria, bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, and that decreases inflammation. And the Treg's gut barrier, that refers to kind of maintaining the lining of the intestines and your immune system. Whereas an animal protein based diet increases the bad bacteria and is associated with heart disease, has been associated with inflammatory bowel disease. Here as well, again, in patients who ate a Mediterranean pattern diet, you're seeing higher levels of bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. If you're eating kind of the more American style diet of pizza, burgers, fries, you're seeing lower levels of those protective bacteria. So I think in terms of what you can do to promote your gut health, it's really exercise, decreasing your stress, and paying attention to the foods that you're eating. This is, if you're interested in learning more about diet or food and cancer prevention, this website, the American Institute for Cancer Research, has a lot of good resources, information about different healthy fruits and vegetables, how to build a healthy food plate. And then the last section, a lot of patients ask us about probiotics, prebiotics, because we talk about the gut microbiome. I think the bottom line is it's really hard right now to medically recommend a certain type of probiotic or a certain strain. And part of the reason why is that each product, there's not really consistent control like you would have from the FDA in terms of what's in each probiotic supplement. Also, we are not quite sure yet how long the changes that happen when you take probiotics last in your gut, and whether the strains that you take in with probiotics are actually implanting and staying in your gut. And just to back up a little bit, when we talk about probiotics, we're referring to the live bacteria that you can get in things like yogurt, kefir, and certain probiotic supplements, um, kombucha. And then prebiotics refer to the mainly fiber that exists in certain foods that helps promote certain bacteria. I would say, should we take probiotics? I personally don't, but that's partly because um, I tend to have kind of a sensitive gut. We do know that probiotics can help people who've just had antibiotics and might be experiencing some diarrhea from it, or people who have a history of irritable bowel syndrome. They might benefit from probiotics. Um, Essentially, what I tell my patients is if you've tolerated probiotics before, I think there's not enough data to tell you to stop taking it. But I also don't have enough information right now to tell you to go out and buy this probiotic. If you eat yogurt, you would be getting some in the yogurt. Um, this is just the last slide, a summary. And I think, again, just the take home point is diet and your lifestyle matter in gut health. Even just putting aside the probiotic question, eating, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to be on a plant based diet, but really increasing vegetables, plants in your diet, decreasing red meats like beef, pork, decreasing processed meats like bacon, sausage, limiting things like sugar, exercising. And I think your next session is on, I think, mindfulness, or really minimizing stress and um, addressing any underlying anxiety can actually be protective for the gut. And that's it.
All right. Thank you so much. Sorry, I was having a little trouble unmuting. Thank you. That was a really awesome presentation, Dr. Piawah. Do we have any questions? I'm sure we have a lot. And actually, one of the first questions I would like to say by Cheryl Perry, you actually just addressed everything that she just asked about your perspective on probiotics and digestive enzymes. So I'm not sure if you still had any more questions, Cheryl, because I feel like she just literally laid everything out. But the question was, just in all fairness, her question was, please let me know your perspective on probiotics and digestive enzymes. And do you, I think you've safely answered that already. Yeah. All right. Do we have any other questions? Here I'll go to um, everybody out in the session. Anyone? Any hands? Okay. G, go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Very interesting presentation, Doctor. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. I think I have one, maybe two questions. When you showed the slide with the leaky gut, okay, there were those little things at the top that looked like locks standing up and then a red portion. What were those little locky things supposed to be? And my second question, before I forget it, is when you say gut, are you talking about everything from the stomach down to the rectum, or is it just the colon? And how can stuff get out of there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So the picture, let me just share the screen and then we can go back. Let me pull it up because it's easier. And then, so, oops, I did it the wrong way. So the little things, so okay, so this is supposed to represent your colon cells. So if you imagine the colon and the small intestine and the rectum, they are cylindrical organs, and everything that's going on is inside that cylinder. And inside of it, the little intestinal cells are all lined up with these things here are called the villi, which are actually helping you absorb food, absorb water from your gut. And these little lines represent the connections that you have between the cells that make up the lining of your gut. This is supposed to represent the inside of that cylinder. So the inside of your gut that's full of bacteria, full of the medications that you're taking, some of the foods that you're eating. And then this is actually, if you imagine this is your gut, and then outside of it are blood vessels and the rest of your body, right? So if there's leaking, the leaking happens from the inside of your gut through the wall into the rest of your body. So this red is the rest of your body. Does that help?
Okay.
Does that help answer your question?
The first part, and I'm not, the second part, is that how it leaks?
Well, that's, again, this concept of leaky gut is not one that, at least in medical school, is an actual syndrome, but the thought is that maybe the contents of your gut leak through the lining into the rest of your body, and that might explain some of the diseases we see. The gut refers to, some people include the esophagus, which is the first part when you eat before the stomach. But when I'm talking about it, I'm thinking of stomach all the way to essentially the rectum and the anal sphincter.
Okay. And then prebiotics.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what those are, besides just saying fruits and vegetables. Why call it a prebiotic?
That's just another, I think that's just another hot term that's come up recently in the era of gut health. I would just say eat lots of, if you look online, there are websites that kind of list foods that people think have a lot of prebiotics. I just think the bottom line is eat a lot of fruits, vegetables. Tree nuts are actually really good for you. And exercise, limit, it's kind of, I think the most important thing that I tell patients is the red meat and processed meat. That's kind of definitively been associated with bad gut health, cancer, just not good for us.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your question, G. It looks like Adele also has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Adele. Uh-oh. Let's see. I'll try to. You turned your camera off. We'll try to do it this way. Can you see it? There. Wait. You had it? Let's try it again. There you go.
Wow. So much for technology. I think I heard the beginning statement that this research was started 5 years ago. Is that correct?
I think it's been ongoing for much longer than that. I think the recent buzz is within the last 5 or so years. Buzz meaning all of these linkages. But
Okay.
I could quote studies from the 1960s that were looking at the gut microbiome as well.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to ask, why was it started? What led to doing this kind of research? Certain diseases?
No, I think it's our technology's gotten better in more recent years in terms of being able to analyze. Essentially, what we're doing is looking at a lot of data, a lot of genetic material that comes from these bacteria. And in the 1960s, we didn't have great sequencing technology, for example. It's really within the last, the 2000s. And I think it seems, I can't really explain why right now, but it really does seem like in the last 2 years in particular, that's when the shift has really started looking at the gut. I think it correlates with some of the technology we have now.
Okay. And what is a biome? biome, literally. What does that mean?
That just means a collection of organisms and whatever materials they produce. So when we say microbiome, we're, I think of a biome as kind of a collection or an environment full of certain things, essentially.
Oh, okay. So it's a kind of a large category.
It's a large category. So, I mean, you can have biomes that have nothing to do with our gut. You can have, you have a skin microbiome. So that's all the bacteria living on your skin and their genetic material. We use biome sometimes to just describe the environment and certain areas or pockets of environment.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Adele, for your question. Thank you very much. I'm going to go down to the chat, and for everybody that's in the session, if you have a question, please tap the little hand icon that raises your hand, and you'll pop up to the top. Okay. So the next question we have for you, Dr. Piawah, is from Gwen. And her question is, what causes the gut lining to break down and help the toxins leak into the bloodstream? Is it things like stress, alcohol, and smoking?
Well, so people who kind of describe the leaky gut syndrome think that, yes, it's the alcohol, drinking too much alcohol, stress, chronic inflammation, foods in our diets that promote inflammation make the connections weaker and make your gut more leaky. But if you can imagine, that principle, I could say the same about kind of maintaining a healthy gut microbiome. So I think we're all talking about the same thing, just not yet overlapped.
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question, Gwen. I'm going to go up to our group here, and I'm going to go to Sedalia, and I'm going to unmute you, Sedalia. There you are. Wait, you're not unmuted. Hold on a second. Let's try it again. There we are.
Okay, because I have ulcerative colitis. Is there going to ever be a cure for that, or do we have to take medicine for the rest of our lives?
For that, we're looking at the microbiome and what role it might play, but that research is too early. And I think, ulcerative colitis, it's an autoimmune disease that's impacting your gut. So at least for now, you would have to take the immune suppressing medications, but the hope is that maybe we can figure out what disturbances are happening in the gut that could help prevent it or at least help the symptoms.
Yeah, because mine's in the colon, but if they can make a man have a baby, they ought to be able to get a cure for ulcerative colitis.
well, okay. Alrighty then.
All right. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for your question, Sedalia. All right. Well, I'm going to go back down to the chat. And this next question is from Cynthia Taylor. And her question is, are there health benefits with taking enzymes if you had a gallbladder removed?
For your gallbladder,
organization, how.
Not usually. It's often if you've had your pancreas removed, for example, then we do give people the pancreatic enzymes. For the gallbladder, all it was doing was making bile, which sometimes if you have issues after the gallbladder removal, we have some medicines for it, but that's something I would, if you're having discomfort, I would definitely bring it up with your doctor.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Alrighty, so I'm going to go back up to our session and I'm going to unmute you, Pamela.
My question is there a cure for irritable bowel syndrome, and what causes it?
Good question. So irritable bowel syndrome is different from inflammatory bowel disease. So irritable bowel really, it's not well understood. It's hard to describe, but essentially some people have kind of more sensitive guts and might have a lower pain threshold. And I think there's a school of thought that maybe the irritable bowel syndrome has to do with that gut brain axis and how certain individuals process the signals that are happening in their gut differently from others. Um, there's not necessarily a cure, but there certainly are ways to control it. There are medications that you can take if you have a lot of constipation from it or diarrhea from it. Probiotics, that I would say that that's probably the one disease where it might be, if you have a lot of upset, disturbances with the IBS, trying probiotics may be beneficial. And then we do think that stress, anxiety, mood correlate with some of the IBS symptoms. So meditation and having some of those issues under control might also improve the symptoms. And then the other thing is the food you're eating. Some patients with IBS have to really carefully eliminate certain foods and reintroduce them, but keeping a food diary also helps.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
thank
most
you, Pamela, for
informative.
your question. Okay, I'm going to go back down to the chat. So our next question is from Patricia H. The question is, in red meats, are our systems picking or selecting from the animal's flesh? And is that what we consume are actually taking in and causing the problems?
So when we eat red meat, the problem really lies in the breakdown products of the red meat and things like short chain fatty acids. It's essentially what happens after we digest the red meat that is pro-inflammatory in the gut. Did that answer your question?
Patricia, did it answer your question? I don't see Patricia on the screen. Hopefully it did. If it didn't, please add another question down there and we'll try to clarify. The next question is from Vera. How much sodium is too much for someone with type 2 diabetes? And does sodium affect your gut?
We I don't know that sodium has been studied yet in terms of gut health, or in terms of type 2 diabetes. Um, I think in terms of healthy sodium, it's been a while since I've counseled people on it, but that's something I would talk to your primary care doctor about.
Mm-hmm.
2 grams a day or less, but I don't. There's not really a connection between sodium and diabetes and sodium and the gut microbiome, as far as I know.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Vera. Okay, so the next question is from Valerie B. In addition to the AICR, can you recommend any reliable websites?
Um, I can send it to the hosts. Are you able to distribute?
Mhm, yeah, and we can put it in the chat. Yes.
I'm blanking on the actual name of the website, but there's another one that I refer patients to that I'll need to find. And
Yeah, if you find it and you send it to us, we'll
Yep,
share it with them. We see all of these folks quite frequently,
yep,
4 days a week, 5 days a week now. So we'll make sure that we get any information that you have
yep.
to share that you find after. It'd be greatly appreciated. I actually have a question that I would like to ask in regards to the health. Are there any studies currently that are being done in relation to how is our gut health connected to our intuition?
Oh, interesting question. Um, Intuition in particular, not that I've seen. Um, I think right now the studies of gut health and brain are really looking at depression, anxiety, dementia. We haven't really gone, or they haven't really gone into as granular as that. But
Mhm.
I think that if the technology gets better and we're able to actually also start showing causation, um, I think that the gut underlies essentially everything that's going on.
Right, right. Because I think about the term of trust your gut, that kind of thing. Like you have this gut feeling,
Mhm.
how these things kind of manifest from your gut and the feelings that you get inside your gut and how it's connected to your brain. So I
Mhm.
was just curious. I know it's a little abstract for research, but hopefully
No,
soon come.
interesting.
Okay,
Yeah.
are there any more questions? I think Sandra, okay, we have another question up in our gallery. Sandra, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, thank you. The presentation was great. So
Absolutely.
my question is there a way to find out the bacteria, the good bacteria that's in your gut versus the bad?
So we do, there are clinical studies that we're doing. Often it's for patients with disease. And then there are commercially available microbiome home testing kits.
Okay.
Um, I don't, as of this point, I'm not recommending that anyone go out and start buying it unless you're just curious and you want to know. The reason why is because some of those tests haven't been validated, and I've seen a readout from one patient and it's like pages and pages of different bacteria, and what to make of that information isn't
Okay.
yet established. That's another thing that I'm happy to provide the company. Um, and you can have it distributed to the group if you're interested.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Sandra. And then we have one more question from the chat, and that's from Tierney. And her question is, does the gut store hormones like serotonin?
Um, it doesn't store it, but the gut actually, we have nerve endings and synapses in the gut, and serotonin does act on the gut. So that's part of kind of what's underlying this gut brain axis. So it's not storing the serotonin, but the serotonin that's in your body is acting locally in the gut.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Tierney. And thank you. Do we have any more questions? Patricia R., you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
I was trying to write it. I didn't finish writing it. Didn't send
It's
it.
okay.
I was just trying to find out because one of the biggest issues we have in our community is about elimination of bowel movements, and I didn't hear you say anything about it. What is normal for elimination of bowel movements? Some people say once a week, once a day, once every now and then, whatever. I don't know. I guess they know it's not, but I thought maybe how does that relate to colon issue?
Yeah, it actually varies a lot. There's not, I think anything from once a day to once every couple or 3 days. It actually really depends on the person and the foods that they're eating. Um, we call constipation when you haven't had a bowel movement within a range that's normal for you, and you're having bloating, gas, and symptoms from it. So there truly are people who have one bowel movement every 4 or 5 days, and that's how they've been for their entire life. And that's not indicative of something wrong. That's just how their gut moves. There's some people who have 2 bowel movements a day. So it's more just what your normal is and whether there's a change in it.
Thank you.
Ideally, it would be once a day, but I think people are just very different.
Yeah. That was a good question. Thank you so much for that question, Patricia R. I have another question from the chat, and that question is from Kelly. And the question is, do you recommend probiotics for people with lactose intolerance?
Great question. I just recommend taking Lactaid or avoiding dairy. I mean, with lactose intolerance, we know exactly why. It's because your gut doesn't, you don't have the enzyme. So taking probiotics won't necessarily give you the enzyme. I would just either avoid dairy or take the enzyme in the form of Lactaid.
Okay. And then we have one last question, which will be from Sandra. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Sandra. Thank you.
Okay, what's your opinion on laxatives?
In general, or for gut health, I would say unless you need a laxative, don't regularly take them.
Okay.
They mess up the signals between your brain and your gut, and unless you've had a lot of constipation and you need it, I would just try to find more natural ways of keeping things moving. So water, fiber, exercise.
Okay.
In terms of the laxatives, if you must use one, Senna is a really painful one. So Miralax tends to be actually a little bit more gentle on the gut.
Okay.
Which is the powder.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Just to piggyback off that question really quickly, what are maybe some natural things you could take, like fruits and vegetables that are like really good with helping with the gut so you could have a regular movement?
Yeah, I would definitely say high fiber foods, so leafy green vegetables, cruciferous, so broccoli, Brussels sprouts. The issue with those is they cause a lot of bloating. So if you're not used to eating a lot of fiber, do it slowly, and then you will be regular. In water, I'm not good at drinking water, but hydration helps.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, but it's fiber and water, and you can't go from 0 to like eating only kale salad in a day. You have to go slowly. But
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has actually been a really, really amazing and informative talk. We really appreciate you, Dr. Piawah. It was really great. A lot of really good information. And with that being said, in our closing, we'd like to take a moment to thank UC Davis School of Medicine, the California Department of Health, City of Oakland Parks and Recreation for supporting this program. And of course, we'd also like to thank Gwen Gates for curating this amazing program. And be sure to join us next Wednesday for Tovi Scruggs, where we'll be sharing techniques on how to harness mindfulness, which is also in connection to having gut health, and staying away from disease. So thank you so much again, Dr. Piawah. This was amazing. Thank you for your time. And thank you all of you for joining us for our Health is Wealth series brought to you by UC Davis School of Medicine and the Good Life program. My name is Shanette, and we'll be signing off. Thank you, and we'll see you all tomorrow for Let's Get
thank you. Thanks so much.
On a beautiful
This was
day.
fun. Thank you.